Today's lecture will be on sponges, which is on page 4 in your invertebrate booklet, and we will be completing that whole entire page with any of the wording that is on the slides. So please write down all of the wording as we go through. The phylum for sponges is Porifera. Porifera means pore bearer. You will want to know both of these things for your exam. Not a lot of people know that sponges are animals because they aren't very animal-like to the naked eye. Now, in the past, sponges actually were classified as a plant. But as scientists started to look into them more and research them, they found out that they are multicellular, so they're made of many cells, and they are heterotrophic. So if you remember, heterotrophic means that the sponges can't make their own food. They have to consume their food from another organism, and that is not a characteristic of a plant. And so the fact that they are heterotrophic was a sign that they are not in fact plants. And then they don't have a cell wall. And so animals lacking cell walls, plants having cell walls, it made researchers and scientists say, we clearly need to reclassify these organisms, and animal is where they better fit. They do have specialized cells that are going to help with the processes that they go through, but they are very simple as an animal. A couple more characteristics of them is that they are asymmetrical. So when we talked about the 3 types of symmetry, asymmetry was one of them, and that means they don't have any. So they're going to grow in all sorts of crazy shapes, and there's not really going to be any kind of symmetry to them. They are filter feeders, so they're going to pull water through them, as you can see in these pictures here. They're pulling water through them, and what happened here is that there's been like a scuba diver that's injected a non-harmful dye around them, and they actually pull that water in with the dye, and then they filter it through them. So you can see this is illustrating that filtering process. And then they are sessile, and sessile means they don't move. So once they land, as the larva, they land and they are on that rock or wherever they are, they're going to stay there for the rest of their life. Now, you don't need to know all of the specific parts of the sponge body. I just wanted to show you because they're kind of interesting to think of them as an animal and how they're functioning as such. And so what happens here is they are going to have these little pores here, which is where they get their name, Porifera, and these pores are going to allow water to come through them. And as they do so, there's these little cells here, and you can see this is a closer image of it, but these are going to be kind of little flagella and collar cells that are going to filter and move that water up and out through that central cavity out the top. In this process, these little hairs here and this flagella are going to select and pull out any micronutrients that are in the water, like algae, plankton, etc. And they are going to be consuming those organisms, which is why they are heterotrophic. Sponges are able to reproduce both sexually and asexually. There are male and female sponges, and you'll see in a video kind of how that works. But basically, the females have eggs in them, and the males just release sperm into the water in the hopes that it finds the female sponge eventually and fertilizes the egg. If that is the case, then the egg and the sperm come together and fertilization takes place. We see that we get a little embryo here, and then eventually that larva lands and starts to develop into a new sponge. Now, once a sponge is already there, asexual reproduction can happen through the process of budding, and so it's just going to produce a new one, and this could, pop off and form a new sponge. The new sponges that are produced through asexual reproduction, though, will be the same genetically as their parent sponge. There are 3 groups of sponges that you're going to need to know. The first is calcareous, and they're calcareous because they're going to have more of a calcium-based structure that's going to help them stay upright. So you can see they're harder. They don't look soft at all like the sponges that we typically think of, and this is characteristic of calcareous sponges. There are also glass sponges. Glass sponges have a kind of more delicate look to them. There's an episode of Blue Planet, I believe, that looks into glass sponges, not specifically looking at the sponge, but they look at a crab that lives within the sponge, and they utilize the filter feeding capability of the sponge to help pull nutrients in for themselves. But then unfortunately, if you can see here, the top of the sponge eventually kind of seals off, and that crab will be too big to go through the pores and the openings of the sponge, and then they eventually die in there. And when I was in college, we had a glass sponge sample in the classroom that had the remains of a crab in there that had gotten stuck. So I thought it was really cool to see that that's a fairly common phenomena on that Blue Planet episode. So these are glass sponges, and you can see they kind of fit their name. They're delicate and glass looking. And our last group of sponge are the demo sponges. There's a lot of sponges that fall into this group, but this is where we get the classic sponge from, is these demo sponges. Sponges originated as, like the sponges that we wash and we use in the house, originated from sponges that were found in the ocean. The sponges that you probably have in your house now are synthetic, so they're made of plastic and other things that are not animals. I have sponges in my house that are plant-based, so they're not, literal sponges, but they are for cleaning purposes. They're just gonna be fake. And but that's not the only type of sponge that can be found in the demo sponges. These giant urn sponges and things like that, they're gonna also be those types of sponges. That is the end of our notes on sponges.